I was insanely angry the night I found out the truth. Not just angry, it felt like something had burst inside me, leaving behind an emptiness that quickly filled with anger. I sat in our dark living room, staring at the candle burning on the coffee table, and felt its soft light cut me like a blade. My Lori, my perfect, caring wife, was not who I thought she was. The truth came suddenly, like a lightning strike. Her phone was lying carefree on the kitchen counter as she went to the shower. It was an incident I wasn't looking for, but which revealed a bitter truth to me. A message from him, her life coach. Fitness. It was incredible last night. I'm looking forward to our next meeting. My hands were shaking as I held this black rectangle that suddenly became a Pandora's box. I kept flipping through, and with each message my heart broke deeper and deeper. A selfie in the gym mirror. Her smile, which I hadn't seen in a long time. I saw her at home. And the worst part is the word she always kept for me. You make me happy. I put the phone back where it had been. Lori came back, wrapped in a towel, with the same carefree smile. What are we going to watch tonight, darling? She asked, as if nothing had happened. I smiled back. My mask was perfect. Inside, I was already developing a plan. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Lori was still asleep, lying with her face to the wall, her brown hair spilling over the pillow. She looked innocent in the dark, almost childlike. My eyes drifted to her phone on the nightstand, but I had seen it all before. There was no need to repeat it. I went downstairs and made breakfast for the kids. Sophie was the first to show up, rubbing her eyes and saying hello in her bubbly voice. Daddy, did you make pancakes? With whipped cream. Her happiness pierced me like an arrow. I smiled and nodded, even though my heart was heavy. For them, I had to remain the same dad who cooks breakfast, laughs at their jokes, and tells them bedtime stories. Lori came downstairs a short time later, looking fresh and radiant as ever. Her kiss on the cheek felt cold, though she probably didn't notice. How did you sleep, dear? She asked, taking a cup of coffee. I nodded and answered briefly. Fine. There was a subtle look of anxiety in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She was a great actress, and I was an even better audience member. I watched, listened, and waited. I decided to play her game, but better. Later that day, I stayed home, taking the day off. Work tasks seemed unimportant. I had another, much more important project in mind. I started collecting information. First, I checked the family laptop. Lori wasn't too careful with passwords because she always assumed I had nothing to worry about. Her mailboxes, accounts on various websites, even messages from her fitness apps were there. And everything was there. The photos they shared. The saved routes of their training. Dates that coincided with her late returns home. Every detail pushed me even deeper into the abyss of betrayal. My hand squeezed the mouse so hard that it cracked. Then I took a deep breath. No, I had no right to lose my temper. This was just the beginning. If she's playing with me, I'm going to play back. But better. That evening, I was preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. Lori was sitting at the table with her laptop, trying to look busy. I suspected she was texting him. Her fingers were running over the keys faster than usual. Is everything okay? I asked in a calm voice as I flipped the steak in the pan. Yes, of course, she answered without even looking up. Her voice was too ordinary. From then on, her every action, every movement, every word was evidence for me. She didn't even know that I had already begun to build my own plan. The next week I became a perfect man. So perfect that I was surprised. I helped with the kids, got them ready for school, repaired the old table in the garage that Lori had been asking me to refinish for a long time. I bought her favorite flowers, and even offered to have a romantic dinner at home. "You've been incredible lately," she said one day, looking at me as if I were a character in a movie. Her compliment was like salt in a wound. But I smiled and replied that I just wanted our family to be happy. She began to open up to me again. It was as if my sudden concern had lifted her defenses. But I knew it was just a ruse. Every night when she fell asleep, I waited a few hours to make sure she was sound asleep. Then I would continue my investigation. The tracker I installed on her phone worked flawlessly. I could see her sending messages and making calls. Most of the time, it was about everyday matters. It seemed like she was not hiding anything. But from time to time, her messages with the coach reappeared. Each time they seemed more confident, less hidden. It was as if she felt untouchable. She was careless, and I'm careful. On Friday night, Lori informed me that she was going to have a late practice and asked me to put the kids to bed. She said it lightly, casually, but I could see her fingers gripping the edge of the chair a little as she spoke. She was nervous. "Of course, dear," I replied. As she walked out of the house, dressed in a sports uniform that she didn't seem to have worn in months, I just nodded. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I took my keys and followed. I kept my distance, so she wouldn't notice me. She drove a few blocks, then stopped at a small cafe on the other side of town. A remote place where it was unlikely that anyone who knew us would see us. But I was there. I was standing in the shadows, watching her go inside. And of course, he was already waiting there. Tall, athletic, with a smug smile. They sat down at a table by the window. She looked so happy, so free. Her laughter, her movements, everything I hadn't seen in our house for a long time. I stood there as if in a dream until my plan began to take shape. This was not just an accident. This was the beginning of the end for Lori. And I had to make sure that the end will be grandiose. When I returned home that night, it felt like I had entered someone else's house. The familiar walls, the photos of our family on the shelf, the smell of the freshly mopped floor, none of it felt like mine anymore. It was a facade, and I was an actor in a play I no longer wanted to play. Lori came home late, looking a little exhausted but happy. "The workout was great," she said, as she tossed her bag onto a chair. "We even added a new element to the stretching." Her voice was so light, as if nothing had happened, as if everything was perfect. "That's good," I replied, trying to look disinterested. I didn't know if she noticed how my hands tightened on the handle of the cup or how my heart was pounding, as if it wanted to escape from my chest. She hid in the bathroom, and I was left sitting in the dark, listening to the sound of the water, which made noise like distant waves. I tried to understand my feelings. Anger, of course, was boiling inside me, but underneath it was another emotion, even more destructive: sadness. It was not the kind of fleeting sadness that comes and goes. It was a heavy, suffocating longing for what I thought was our life together. Those moments when we laughed until we cried, when we hid under the covers from the children who decided that they should play pirates in the middle of the night. Were those memories? Were they real? Or were they just a decoration in a life she had long ago decided to destroy? The following days were hard. I worked more so that I could be at home less. But even in the hustle and bustle of work, her image was always before my eyes. I remembered how she looked at him in that cafe, how she laughed at his jokes. It was the same smile she gave me in our best times. It made me want to scream, but I couldn't let myself break down. Later, in the garage, I stood in front of my old workbench, trying to find solace in the familiar work. But my hands did not move. They hung in the air while my gaze rested on the wall. My head was filled with thoughts. Could I just end it all now? Come to her with the evidence, make her explain herself, scream, cry? But what would that do? I closed my eyes and inhaled. No. That would have been easy for her. She would have made excuses, sworn that it was all a mistake, and somehow it would have turned against me. She would have survived the fight, and I would have been left with my broken heart. This time the game would be different. I wasn't going to just take the hits. I decided that if my love had turned into pain, then her life had to be hell as well. But for that, I had to wait, be patient and smart. This internal struggle was eating away at me. I would look at my reflection in the mirror and not recognize the man standing in front of me. It wasn't the same James who used to buy her favorite pies or write down silly Valentine's Day greetings. But this was a new me, the one who would no longer allow himself to be a victim. That night, I went to bed next to her, feeling her breath on my shoulder. Her hand gently touched my side, as it had thousands of times before. But now every touch reminded me of her lies. She did not know that her time was running out. But I did. The plan of revenge began to take shape in my head like a puzzle. Not quickly, but steadily. Every element, every detail had its place. It was not supposed to be simple. I wanted to create something more a flawless scenario where Lori would feel the same way I felt. Pain, betrayal, humiliation. The first step was obvious. I had to gather more evidence. Not just messages or photos. I wanted an irrefutable picture of her lies. I started using hidden cameras. Small devices that you can buy at. I installed one in our living room, another in the kitchen, where she often left her phone, and another in the car. I set one in our living room, another in the kitchen where she often left her phone, and another in the car. If they meet, if they talk on the phone, I will know. Once I even lied about a business trip to be able to follow. I had to do it all day long. I admit I felt low. A man who turns into a spy in his own home. But I convinced myself that it was necessary. I didn't start this game, but I was definitely going to win it. In a few weeks, I collected enough evidence to write a book. Their meetings, calls, messages. I found out where they saw each other, when, and even what jokes they made about me. Once I heard him call me St. James, because I was so gullible that I didn't even notice my wife going behind my back. These words stung like acid. But instead of letting them burn me, I used them as fuel. The next step was tricky. I decided that I would not just reveal her sins to Laura. I would make her believe that she was setting a trap for herself. I began to play with her feelings. In the morning I was caring and loving, in the evening I was cold and distant. I offered trips, which I canceled at the last minute, saying that I had to work. Lori looked more and more confused. Are you sure you're feeling okay? She asked one evening when we were having dinner. Yes, I answered, shrugging my shoulders slightly. Why do you ask? You've been different lately. I smiled at her, but it was a smile without warmth. I just think a lot. About life. About us. She looked down at her plate, and I saw her fingers trembling nervously. She could feel that something was wrong, but she didn't realize what it was yet. It was perfect. The third step was the boldest. I organized a party in honor of our anniversary. And I invited a coach. It was a risky but necessary gamble. I wanted to see them together in a public space where they could not afford to openly demonstrate their feelings. But the tension between them should have been obvious. Lori was surprised when I suggested a party. You hate these things, she said. Looking at me suspiciously. We deserve it, I replied. 8 years together. Isn't that worth celebrating? She smiled, but her eyes remained wary. Yes, you're right. It will be great. And it really will be. But not for her. The party was on the next level of my plan. The party started as planned, a regular gathering of friends and family. Wine, snacks, light jokes. I walked among the guests, greeting everyone and playing the role of the perfect host. Lori looked stunning in a black dress that she wore only for special occasions. Her smile was brilliant, almost flawless, if I didn't know what she was hiding behind that mask. I invited him, the coach, too. I thought to explain it to Laura like this. If you work with him so often, it would be rude not to invite him. He's an important part of your life, isn't he? She twitched, but hid it with a smile. Yes, that's very nice of you, she replied, a little hesitantly. I could see her nervous, and it gave me a strange pleasure. When he appeared, the room became tense. He was tall, confident, with a. He looked like a man who was not used to hiding his feelings. His eyes found Lori almost immediately, and at that moment I thought I heard her heart stop. She quickly looked down, but it was enough to give me a cold, almost mathematical calm. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and smiled like an old friend. Thank you for coming, I said. Lori always talks about your training a lot. I was a little embarrassed, but quickly pulled myself together. Yes, she's a great client, he said, and I could hardly help but smile. How skillfully he keeps up the facade. The guests were drinking, talking, laughing, but I could see them. Lori avoided his gaze, but from time to time they crossed paths like magnets. Their tension was so obvious that I could feel it physically. The game was on. By the middle of the evening, I made my next move. I invited everyone into the living room, where a large TV took up almost the entire wall. I want to show you something special, I said, holding a glass of wine in my hand. Everyone gathered in interest, whispering. Lori looked at me with a bit of concern. What is it, James? She asked, trying to sound casual. Just a surprise for everyone, I replied. I plugged the flash drive into the TV and pressed play. A video appeared on the screen. A remote cafe shot through a window. Lori and the coach leaning into each other, laughing, touching hands. The room froze. One of the guests sighed loudly. Lori sat there as if petrified, her face pale. James, she whispered, but I held up my hand, silencing her. Don't say a word, Lori. This is just the beginning, I said, not taking my eyes off her. New footage appeared on the screen. The messages they were exchanging. Selfies. Correspondence that they considered private. The guests began to look at each other and whisper. The atmosphere in the room became stifling. The coach jumped to his feet, red with anger or shame. What kind of nonsense is this? He shouted, but his voice was shaking. It's your life, I replied coldly. The life you two decided to build behind my back. Lori stood up, her eyes glistening with tears. James, let's talk in private. Privately? I asked again, and my smile turned as sharp as a knife. In private, you could have left it all in your fantasies. But you crossed the line. And now it's not just between us anymore. I raised my glass, looking at the shocked faces of the guests. To the truth we all deserve, I said, and took a sip. At that moment, their perfect facade cracked completely. And that was only the beginning of my triumph. Lori stood in the middle of the room, looking confused and vulnerable, like a shadow of herself. The guests were silent. Some whispered, others pretended to look into their wine glasses, as if looking for salvation. But I kept my eyes on Lori. She had always been a skilled actress, but now the mask came off, and I saw her as she really was, frightened, humiliated, and almost defenseless. James, let's talk, she said, her voice trembling. Talk? I repeated, taking a step toward her. You want to talk now? Fine. Only now you will explain everything. Not to me, to them. I gestured to our friends and acquaintances, who did not dare to look us in the eye. It's not what you think, she began, trying to find some words, but they hung in the air. Not what I think, I snapped, my voice sounding harsher than I expected. So it's not you in those messages? You're not the one in this cafe? You're not the one calling me boring behind his back? Maybe it's just your 2 cents? Lori tried to say something, but the words were lost. I saw her lower lip tremble, and then she looked down like a schoolgirl who hadn't learned her lesson. The coach, trying to keep his composure, took a step forward. Listen, dude. You are exaggerating. We're just friends. I laughed. It was a dry, joyless laugh. Friends? Friends who exchange photos? Friends who meet late at night in places no one else goes? Friends who discuss how to get around my husband? That's an interesting version of friendship. The coach was embarrassed, but quickly tried to deflect the attention. You're a control freak. Controlling? I interrupted. Yes, I was in control. Because one of us had to be in control while you were dragging our marriage down. Lori suddenly jumped up and ran upstairs. The guests remained as if paralyzed. Some were about to leave. Others were waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't pay any attention to them. I went after her. I found her in her bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking, her face wet with tears. When I walked in, she looked at me as if she wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. James, she tried, but her voice broke. No, I said firmly, raising my hand. You've had months to talk. Months, Lori. But you chose to lie. It was a mistake, she blurted out. I'm lost. We were lost. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Her words sounded like an excuse, but I saw behind them a fear she had never shown before. Is that your version? I asked, leaning closer. Are you saying that all this a coincidence? Months of lies, meetings, deceptions. An accident? Lori covered her face with her hands and cried. I stood in front of her, cold as ice. I had her now. But it wasn't over yet. Do you think I'm doing this just for the stage in front of our friends? I whispered, leaning closer. It was just the beginning, Lori. Just the beginning. Tomorrow, when your kids ask why Mommy isn't home anymore, what are you going to tell them? Will you tell them about the cafe? About its stupid messages? She looked up, her eyes full of horror. Oh, and one more thing. I made sure your boss saw this video as well. I'm sure he'll be interested to know how you manage your time. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Now she saw me, the real me, without the mask. And I think she finally realized that I would not forgive her. This was just the beginning. Lori sat on the edge of the bed, as if petrified. Her eyes were wide open, and her face looked devastated. For a few seconds she just looked at me, as if she was trying to figure out if this was reality or a nightmare. But it was real, and I enjoyed every second of her confusion. You couldn't have done this, she whispered, her voice like a cracked glass. I could and did, I replied calmly. This is just the beginning, Lori. Everything you've been trying to hide is now part of your life. Not in your controlled version, but in mine. She started to cry. But these were not the tears that used to melt my heart. They were tears of fear and realization that I had the situation in hand. She could no longer manipulate me, and it seemed like an unbearable blow to her. James, think of the children, she said through her sobs. They shouldn't have to see this. It's not their fault. About the children? I felt a wave of anger rise in my chest. I'm thinking about them. Every day. And they deserve to know who you really are. They will grow up and see that their mother is a liar who chose someone else over her family. She shook her head, tears streaming down. I don't know why I did it. It just happened. We can fix it. We can start over. Fix it? I almost laughed at her impudence. You want us to start from scratch? And what exactly? Or are you going to deny all those pictures, all those messages? Do you think I will forget how you laughed with him at our life? She was silent. Her shoulders dropped like a boxer's after the last punch. I took a step back to get a little distance from it all. The room was stifling, not because of the temperature, but because of the weight of everything that hung between us. Her deception. Mine. A decision. Her fear and my anger. It all seemed so real that I could even feel it in the air. I'm giving you a choice, I said, stopping in the doorway. You pack your things and get out of this house today, or I'm going to act even more decisively. And believe me, I won't stop until I've destroyed everything you've tried to build. James, please. She wanted to say something else, but her voice broke. I am not your enemy, Lori, I added quietly, almost whispering. But you made me one. And now I'm going to take advantage of all the opportunities you've given me. I left the room, leaving her alone with my fear and shame. In the corridor, I was greeted by silence and darkness. The guests had already left. The house was as empty as my heart. I did not know what would happen next. But I knew one thing. My fight was not over. Lori hadn't yet realized how far I was willing to go to take control of my life and make her feel all the pain she had caused me. And it was not the end. It was just a new chapter in my story. The night was quiet, but not for me. My mind was in chaos. I sat in the kitchen, staring at my half-empty glass of wine, wondering what to do next. I had made Lori see the true cost of her betrayal, but something in me whispered that this is not enough. It was just the tip of the iceberg. I didn't just want to make her feel my pain. I wanted her to lose everything she thought was hers. At about 2 a.m, I heard her come down the stairs. Her steps were slow, hesitant. I didn't even look up when she entered the kitchen. She looked broken. Her eyes were red, and her hair was disheveled. This was not the confident woman I had seen for months. James! Her voice sounded almost silent. What do you want? I said, not even looking at her. I packed my things, she said. I'm going to leave. But please, don't interfere with my work. Don't mess up. I turned my head to look at her. Her face was full of pleading, but it didn't move me. You think this is just about work? You've ruined us, Lori. The job is only part of it. You took our promises, our lives, and smashed them to pieces. She sat down on the chair opposite me, and her hands were shaking. I know it's my fault. But please, the children. They don't need to see this. I took another sip of wine, looked her straight in the eye and said, You didn't think about the children when you lied to me. You didn't think about them when you spent time with him instead of us. So why should I think about them now? Lori started crying again, but this time I felt nothing. No regret. No weakness. She had put herself in this situation, and now her tears would not change anything. Okay, she said after a few minutes of silence. I'll go to my mom's. But I ask you, please don't involve the children in this. I was silent. My head was full of thoughts and plans. I knew I had to let her go. It was too early for the final blow. Go, I finally said. She got up, staggering, and left. I heard the door close behind her. For the first time in months, the house was completely empty. But instead of, I was relieved that it was just the calm before the storm. The next day, I started implementing the next stage. I went to her workplace, to her bosses, using the same evidence I showed the guests. Her connection to the coach was a problem for their reputation. Everyone wants to look professional until the truth comes out. I also started to get in touch with his entourage. He was not just a coach for me. I learned that he had repeatedly destroyed other relationships, and I was going to make him feel the same isolation that I felt. By the end of the week, his photo with Lori appeared in several local groups. Everyone was talking about them. His career was on the verge of being destroyed, and her name was mentioned in every third comment. Lori tried to write to me several times. She asked, she begged. But I didn't answer. I let her know that this was just the beginning, and she couldn't do anything to stop me. The intrigue was growing. My life turned into a complex scenario where I became a director. And although I knew I was approaching the point of no return, I wasn't going to stop. The days after she left were both calm and chaotic. The house became quiet, perhaps too quiet. The children would ask about Lori, and I would answer as calmly as possible. Mom is staying with her grandmother for now. She needs some time to herself. They seemed satisfied with this answer, but I could see a shadow of doubt in their eyes. Sophie, who was always attentive, once asked, "Didn't you fight with your mom?" I was pierced through and through. 8 years of marriage, and now even the kids could feel the cracks I was trying to hide. "We're just talking about important things, baby," I said, leaning down to kiss her head. "Everything will be fine." I promised her that, even though I knew it wasn't true. Every day I continued to work on my revenge. The video I showed at the party went viral among our friends and acquaintances. People were talking, calling, sending messages. They wanted to know what was going on. But I didn't answer. I wanted the story to live its own life, without my explanations. Intrigue, reinforced by silence, always works better than the loudest statements. Coach also felt the pressure. I found out that several of his clients canceled their subscriptions, and some even openly accused him of being unprofessional. It was a small loss for him, but it was only the beginning. I managed to find his girlfriend. It turned out that she knew nothing about his affair with Lori. Her shock and pain were almost as great as mine when I learned the truth. We met in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. She was a frail woman with large eyes that shone with anger and pain. "He said they were just working together," she said, clutching her coffee cup as if she wanted it. Crush. "I thought so too," I replied, looking her calmly in the eye. "But here we are." We talked for an hour or two. She told me about his habits, how he often stayed late at work, or had emergency calls with clients. Our stories were almost identical. When she showed me some of his messages, I felt like the anger comes back to me in a new wave. He lied to both of us, and it was perfect. We decided to act together. Her anger became my ally. She helped me gain access to even more of his personal information, addresses, contacts, even bank statements. It turned out that this coach was not so clean after all. His business was partially sponsored by dubious money, and I planned to use it to my advantage. Meanwhile, Lori continued to write. Her messages changed from anger to pleading, from excuses to accusations. "You're overreacting," she wrote one evening. "We can work this out." I did not answer. Silence was the best weapon. But one day, after her 10th message of the day, I wrote to her, "We will solve it, but not in the way you think." This phrase left her on edge. And that was exactly what I wanted. Lori started to get scared. She knew that I was playing by my own rules, and that I wouldn't stop. My next step was to use time. I waited for the moment when she would be most vulnerable. My plan was still in the works, but I could already see the final picture. Her career, her reputation, her comfortable life, all of it was going to collapse the way my trust in her had. And while I was waiting, I continued to prepare the ground. People began to take my side. They began to doubt Laura, her version of events. Public opinion is a dangerous tool if not used correctly. I saw her world slowly crumble. And although I sometimes felt a shadow of regret, it quickly disappeared when I remembered those nights of lies and betrayal. But I was not going to give up yet. The big denouement was ahead. Lori's fate was hanging in the balance, and I knew it. She moved in with her mother, hoping to find refuge and escape from the chaos she had created. But my plans were not yet complete. I didn't want to just humiliate her or destroy her reputation. I wanted her to understand every drop of pain she had caused me and our children. The last stage of my plan required precision, but also emotional and cold-bloodedness. I collected all the records, correspondence, videos, everything that reminded me of her betrayal. Instead of just using them against her, I decided to create something more personal. One Saturday, when the children were at their grandmother's house, I walked into the empty living room and turned on my laptop. I wrote a letter to Laura, sincere and ruthless, almost like a confession, but not mine, hers. I described everything she had done, every lie, every deception, but I wrote it as if it were her own story. In this letter, I made her admit her mistakes. I made her admit to everything. After that, I sent a letter to everyone who was important to her, her friends, her colleagues, even her boss. The letter was to begin with the words, "I'm Lori, and I want to share what happened." It was not just an act of revenge. It was an attempt to show her to the world as she really was. It was a risky move, but I knew it would make her see everything she had lost. It wasn't anonymous. I signed the letter. I wanted her to know that it was me. That it was me who was in control, not her. A few hours after sending the messages, I received a call from her. She was screaming, crying, begging. "You ruined everything," she screamed into the phone. "My life, my career, our relationship." I listened to her, keeping calm, and said only one thing. "You destroyed it yourself. I just put a mirror in front of you." The next day, her face appeared on local forums. People started gossiping, discussing, condemning. I read the comments but felt nothing but cold. My heart had long been ice cold. At the same time, I made sure that the coach also received his share of attention. After several calls to the tax office and several leaks about his shady business, his activities began to be checked. His gym closed 2 weeks later. But that was not all. I knew I had to do something to get my children back to normal. So I filed for divorce. Lori tried to argue, but she had no arguments. The courts were on my side, and I got custody of the children. That night, when I put Sophie and Ben to bed, I stood in their room looking at their calm faces. I felt like crying. Not out of pity, but out of exhaustion. It was a war I had won, but the victory was bitter. I was no longer the person I used to be. Lori had taken a part of me, and I had taken a part of her. But in that moment, standing in the middle of the silence, I realized that I was finally free. However, one question remained: what now? A few months passed. Life became calmer, but I still felt as if I had gone through a storm and came out the other side with numerous scars. The children began to get used to the new schedule, and although they occasionally remembered their mother, I tried to keep things light and stable for them. Lori never wrote again. After the court decision, she just disappeared from our lives. I heard that she had moved to another city and was trying to start over, but I no longer cared. My focus was on the kids and on rebuilding of his own life. Sometimes, when I sat in the kitchen late at night, I would remember the chaos, the anger that guided my every decision. And although I had achieved everything I wanted, I felt empty. Revenge gave me justice, but it did not give me back what I had lost. One day I went for a walk with Sophie and Ben in the park. They were laughing, running, playing ball. I looked at them and realized that even after all these dark days, there is something worth fighting for. They are my new life, my new beginning. Maybe I will never forgive Laura, and maybe this experience will stay with me forever. But I knew one thing: I had survived. And now everything depended on me.